Bitcoin is down over 30% since the October all-time high. And the question we all have now is just how low is Bitcoin going to go? It's at $85,000 at the time of me recording this. We need to talk about what happens if it goes lower and what does a rebound really look like. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and let's see what Bitcoin has in store for us. So if we take a look at Bitcoin's chart right now, this is a weekly chart. And as we can see, we are closing in on $85,000 just over the last few hours. It actually broke down below $85,000. And if we take a look at the October all-time high of $126,000, well, Bitcoin is now down roughly 32% from that high. And the question is, how low is it going to go? A lot of people were saying that the range between, $91,000 and $93,000 was going to be that first level of support. The next level of support is likely going to be the range of $74,000 to let's say $78,000, where Bitcoin reached in April. And as you guys all know, in April, it was the massive tariff news that brought us down here. Capitulation, liquidation was all happening back there too. And Bitcoin did go down 31% during the April dump. Now, we also had another dump in, March of 2024, which lasted for the better part of the 6 months, all the way up until September of 2024. But at that time, Bitcoin had drawn down all the way, 32 to 33%. So we have had these dips before. Now, the reason this dip has a lot of investors worried, and myself included, is because we've lost that 50-week moving average on this weekly chart. It is now likely going to be the second week that we close below this blue line. And of course, there's still, 3 days left before this weekly candle closes. But if we take a look at the last time we had consecutive weekly candle closes below the 50-week moving average, we really saw, the downfall of Bitcoin and the slow onset of the bear market. But again, I want you guys to realize what happened here is when we had this, massive drawdown for Bitcoin, after it fell below the 50-week moving average for 2 consecutive weekly closes, it continued to go down and, it went down to 31%. But after that, it actually rallied quite a bit. And that is something that I am particularly waiting on, because we've been now, weeks and weeks on end with this dump. And at some point in time, you have to think that there's going to be a local bottom and there is going to be a rebound there, which could potentially be a bull trap, of course, given those conditions. But we can see that we did have a nice rebound on Bitcoin when that happened back in 2022. We did bounce 50 or 45% from the lows when that happened. So again, I am optimistic that if we do get a bounce, we are going to bounce and we're likely going to come near that 50-week moving average, which is currently sitting around 102,800. But again, the first question is just how low are we going to dip? Is it going to dip all the way to that $75,000 range, which at this point is not that far away? We can see it's roughly, another 10% dip on Bitcoin. Perhaps it dips into here, coincides with some of the April lows that we had, and then bounces back to that 50-week moving average. And at that point, it's going to be a decision as to whether or not Bitcoin is going to break above the 50-week moving average, which held support for the last 2.5 years, or is it going to now be resistant and Bitcoin is going to fall against it, just like we saw in the 2022 bear market? That is what I'm currently looking at right now. And if we take a look at what's happening in the markets, well, it's absolute complete panic. It's complete fear. And oftentimes, the majority of people are just simply wrong in the market. So if you take a look at the fear and greed index right now, we are at 11. We're actually lower than we were in March and April with the tariff news. It's pure panic in the space. Investors are in pure fear. We're talking about crypto. We're talking about the stock market. Every market is having a capitulation event. A lot of leveraged people, a lot of liquidations are continuing to happen. And that is the result of this current market. Now, if we take a look at what people are betting on right now, because prediction markets, in my opinion, are likely going to be the thing for a bear market. Once a bear market really comes, I do think people are just going to resort to prediction markets because they want to feel something. They want to, have something to do when prices are doing great in stocks as well as crypto. But if we take a look at what people are currently saying, well, 85% say that Bitcoin crashes below $80,000 before reaching $150,000. Now, it's a bit vague because $150,000 on Bitcoin, it doesn't really say when it's going to be reached. But ultimately speaking, people right now are thinking that Bitcoin is going to fall below 80,000 before reaching a new all-time high. And if we take a look at, liquidations right now, everyone is shorting the market. This is a 7-day chart of Bitcoin exchange liquidation maps. If we go all the way to $97,000, there are $8.2 billion of short leverage all the way up there. And as you can see, if we go all the way to $75,000 or $76,000, there's only about $1 billion worth of longs. So this means that everybody is shorting the market right now and pushing the price down even further. So that's another thing to continue looking at right now because nobody wants to long this market. Every single bounce that we've had intraday has been met with more selling pressure, more liquidations, and continues to be pushed down and amplified with the entire fear that we're seeing in the markets. Now, if we take a look at social interest, that's also not helping the case for Bitcoin because looking at this chart here, we can see that, Bitcoin's price has made new all-time highs. It's currently below $100,000. It is down 30% from, the all-time highs, but social interest has literally remained unexistent ever since, the later parts of 2025. As Bitcoin has made new all-time highs, nobody cares about it. And even as Bitcoin is dipping, not a whole lot of interest in the social metrics. So this is another thing that I am continuing to look at because if you compare and be devil's advocate and look at, let's say, what people are searching for right now, if it's not Bitcoin, does that mean that people are searching for the bear market or, asking whether or not this is a bear market? And if you look at the trends right now on bear markets, well, you can see that, we're not necessarily peaking. Yes, we are definitely above what we were in the summertime, but nowhere near where we were in April when tariff news was happening. So this is very interesting because as we know, we bottomed out when bear market fears were at all-time highs in terms of trends on Google or what people are searching. And it was a very quick peak in this category of searches, as well as a very quick dip on the fear and greed index and a very quick rebound on Bitcoin. But right now we're seeing, not a whole lot of peaking or searches of bear markets. We are seeing a massive capitulation event in crypto, but we're not seeing that necessarily reflected in the searches on Google. So it is quite interesting. And it also brings me to think that this continues to be all about whether or not people believe in the 4-year cycle or people believe in liquidity conditions. Because at this point in the market, what we have to ask ourselves is, are the bullish catalysts enough to bring Bitcoin back? And if so, how high can it bring Bitcoin to? Because ultimately speaking, if we're thinking about the future and let's say 2026 is a bullish year, and let's say that the 4-year cycle doesn't exist or is broken and Bitcoin does actually make a new all-time high in 2026, or let's say in the end of 2025. We know that we have a certain few catalysts left. First and foremost, quantitative tightening is going to end in December. Is that going to be enough to make Bitcoin, break this downtrend and make a new all-time high? I am not sure. I don't have a crystal ball, but that is one of the catalysts you have to keep your eyes on. Number 2, we have an FOMC meeting happening in December. whether or not the Fed cuts rates is another potential bullish catalyst to happen in the near future. Although, as I'm making this video, we have, 65% chance of the Fed not cutting interest rates in December. Again, this is just what the markets are predicting. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen, as there is a 35% chance that the Fed does continue to cut in December. Now, beyond that, we still see that in 2026, there are likely to be 2 to 3 more cuts, all the way to an interest rate of 3 to 3.25, which is still, 50 to 0.75 basis points from the current interest rates that we are at. So one can argue that in 2026, in the first half of the year, there are likely to be more rate cuts, which is also going to help liquidity conditions in the US economy. Now, is that going to be, in addition to quantitative tightening ending in December, enough to push the price of Bitcoin back to all-time highs, or even higher to some of the price predictions we've seen from JP Morgan of $170,000. So going back to Bitcoin's chart, to be back at the all-time high, Bitcoin needs to make a pretty significant move of, let's say, 47% to come back to its all-time high. Now, if that's the case, and if these bullish factors we've just talked about are going to be enough for Bitcoin to do this, then it's likely that 2026 is going to be a good year. But playing devil's advocate and, thinking that right now we've broken some pretty heavy support on Bitcoin for the last 2.5 years, if Bitcoin does bottom out at $6,000 in the April lows, well, is it more realistic that Bitcoin does bounce? Because again, I don't dispute that Bitcoin won't bounce. I do think it's going to bounce, but is it going to bounce high enough to reestablish that 50-week moving average support? And whether or not it's not just going to bounce from here, turn that level into resistance, because that 100K mark is going to be very interesting to see whether or not Bitcoin is able to hold it, turn it into support, or act as resistance. That is, in my opinion, what's going to be the ultimatum of this bull market. And right now, I do think that it's looking a little bit more bearish, just like the entire markets are saying, but I do still see a bounce happening in the next weeks to come. So let me know what you guys think down below. I do think that there are a lot of bullish catalysts left, but the question I have is whether or not that's going to be enough to bring back Bitcoin to 1, above the 50-week moving average, 2, to a new all-time high, and 3, how much higher than $126,000, and is that going to be enough to bring euphoria back in the markets for people to go absolutely crazy on Bitcoin? That's kind of the 3 questions I currently have on Bitcoin's price trajectory. Let me know what you guys think down below. And if we quickly talk about, altcoins, because ultimately speaking, we are still all holding altcoins at this point. Looking at Ethereum versus Bitcoin, this is probably the chart you have to be monitoring right now, because ever since the all-time high of August 2025, we've been in a downtrend for what we have in Ethereum Bitcoin, meaning that Ethereum is losing against Bitcoin. And we are entering a very specific range that we have been before back in July. Taking a look at this is likely the support that we need to hold for Ethereum Bitcoin, because if we do start falling lower and, potentially even lower, we may be breaking that trend of lower highs, as ETH Bitcoin has continued to do so for the better part of the last few months, ever since Ethereum and Bitcoin bottomed out in April of 2025. So you can look at this chart. You can also look at, your altcoins versus Bitcoin chart, which is that total 3 chart minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. We also know that bottomed out last time when QT started. And if we take a look at this chart, well, we have QT ending in 2 weeks. Right now, altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin. It makes sense because Bitcoin is just cascading down. So is this the bottom of altcoins versus Bitcoin, we're still going to have to wait and see. Bitcoin dominance continues to fall as Bitcoin is just continuing to plummet. But again, I do think that we are going to have to see a rebound in Bitcoin for altcoins to really start performing better, because even though in the sense of alt Bitcoin going up, the USD value of alts are not going up. So that is something important to differentiate between those two analyses. But that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. There's a lot of uncertainty in the markets right now. And usually when the masses are calling for something like an AI bubble or, as start of a bear market, there usually is the complete opposite that happens. Nobody has ever timed the bear market perfectly. And right now, BitMine continues to buy Ethereum. If we take a look at Arkham, just over the last few hours, they bought $18 million worth of Ethereum. And to think that BitMine is down, over $3 billion in negative P&L right now, it's absolutely insane. So that is something to also keep in mind, because they continue to buy. And last but not least, even though NVIDIA reported great earnings over the last few days, it actually went down over, the last couple of days, which is crazy because a lot of people are calling for an AI bubble. We're not seeing this AI bubble with the revenue and earnings that NVIDIA just had, although we are still seeing complete fear in the markets and NVIDIA being down in the last few days, despite crushing earnings and, shutting down some of the AI bubble fears. So with that said, there's a lot happening in terms of sentiment in the markets right now. Bitcoin's chart does not look great. Can it rebound enough to bring euphoria back in the markets, to make ETH go higher and to bring altcoins with it? That's really the question we need to start answering or trying to answer. And I do believe that in the next few weeks, we are going to have more answers with what's coming up in QT and the FOMC meeting. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace.